what if the true edge of the world is not a place people reach, but a place where human power begins to thin out, where silence grows larger than cities, and the earth seems to return to one of its oldest forms? Welcome to English Mindwave. Before going further, please subscribe to support the channel and help keep these stories alive. That support truly matters, and it helps this channel continue exploring the deeper histories, places, and forces that shape the world. Patagonia has never been just a beautiful region at the bottom of South America. It feels like one of those rare places where geography reveals something deeper about politics, power, and the limits of human ambition. It matters because it feels like one of the last places on Earth where the modern world is forced to remember that it never fully conquered the planet. More than 12,000 years ago, the first people entered this territory. Long before modern borders, explorers, or states, there was only land, water, wind, and time. That ancient feeling never disappeared. Patagonia stretches across more than 1 million square kilometers, and even now, it remains one of the least populated regions on Earth. On the Chilean side, it breaks into fjords, glaciers, dark forests, and cold channels. On the Argentine side, it opens into plains, salt lakes, cliffs, and horizons so wide they seem to drain the world of noise. It is one region, yet it carries two different faces, both shaped by forces older than any nation that later claimed them. At the far south lies Tierra del Fuego, where the continent seems to lose its final certainty and dissolve into islands, rock, sea, and endless wind. The name, given by early European navigators, almost sounds misleading. This is not a land of warmth, but of cold water, fractured coastlines, and weather that never seems willing to rest. Here, the earth feels unfinished, as if the familiar structure of the world is breaking apart. Patagonia leaves such a strong impression because it does not feel arranged for human comfort. It feels like a place where the planet reveals itself before civilization softened it with systems, names, and order. And once Patagonia begins to feel larger than civilization, the story naturally leads to the place where human beings tried to answer that vastness with order, punishment, and control. Ushuaia, often described as the last city before the end of the world, stands at that threshold. Today it is known for its harbor and its link to Antarctic travel. But the deeper meaning of Ushuaia lies not in the postcard image. It lies in what the city reveals about how states imagine power. Ushuaia did not begin as a dream destination. In the late 19th century, it began as a missionary outpost, and then it took on a harsher role as a penal colony. That decision reveals a great deal about the human mind. Governments have often believed that geography itself can be used as an instrument of control. Russia had Siberia. Argentina had Tierra del Fuego. By sending prisoners far enough south into freezing waters, violent weather, and immense remoteness, the state believed the land itself would finish the work of punishment. When the first prisoners arrived in 1896, exile was no longer just a legal sentence. Distance itself became part of the machinery. What becomes striking here is the point where politics and landscape merge. The state tried to recruit nature into its own system of discipline. Yet Patagonia never fully submitted to that logic. Prisoners cut wood, built docks, and laid rail lines. The same men the government hoped would disappear into the far south helped build the settlement that later survived them. There is a heavy irony in that. A city now visited by tourists was shaped in part by people who understood what it meant to live where civilization grows thin, and the land still feels stronger than the state. Over time, Ushuaia changed. The prison became a museum. The harbor filled with ships and fishing boats. What had once been a place of punishment slowly turned into a place of attraction. But the deeper tension never vanished. Ushuaia still does not feel like a city that conquered its surroundings. It feels like a city that learned carefully and uneasily how to remain inside a landscape that never truly became tame. And beyond Ushuaia, the story opens into the element that has judged human ambition more harshly than any government ever could: the water. The Beagle Channel stretches between Argentina and Chile like a cold artery running through the far south. Named after HMS Beagle, the ship that carried Charles Darwin through these waters in the 1830s, it links the Atlantic and Pacific through a maze of islands and narrow passages. Yet names and routes do little to soften its character. The channel feels less like a path and more like a warning. Human beings can map waters, cross them, and attach history to them. But that does not mean they have mastered them. Even the small markers of human presence feel fragile here. The lighthouse of Les Éclaireurs rises from its rocky islet with quiet dignity. But it does not feel like a symbol of triumph. It feels more like an admission of vulnerability. A lighthouse in a place like this does not prove control. It only proves that people have needed help surviving the passage. Farther along lies Martillo Island, where Magellanic penguins arrive each austral spring to nest, joined by gentoo penguins and, more recently, a few king penguins. At first glance, that detail seems gentle, but it carries something deeper. Wildlife here is not only part of the scenery, it is evidence. It reflects currents, climate, and the quiet ways a changing planet reaches even the farthest corners of the South. Then come the harsher waters beyond. The Drake Passage and Cape Horn have long carried the reputation of danger, storms, and shipwrecks. Before the Panama Canal changed global trade, these waters formed one of the most feared maritime routes between the Atlantic and Pacific. Sailors, merchants, and empires depended on them. But dependence never meant safety. Patagonia has always reminded the world that economic ambition and political reach are still subject to geography. And yet, Patagonia is never harsh in only one way. North of Ushuaia, Laguna. Esmeralda glows with an almost impossible turquoise beneath snow-covered mountains. The same is true of the Strait of Magellan, once the southern gateway of the world. In this part of Patagonia, water is not a backdrop. It is an active force in history, trade, ecology, and survival. Once the sea has shown how easily human movement can be humbled, Patagonia reveals an even older authority. Inland, in stone, ice, and silence. Near the Zeno Ultima Esperanza stands Puerto Natales, a small port city shaped by sheep ranching, migration, and frontier life. British, Croatian, and Chilean settlers helped establish the estancias that transformed the nearby plains into part of Patagonia's wool economy. But Puerto Natales matters less as a settlement than as a threshold. Beyond it, roads loosen, distances widen, and the land opens toward Torres del Paine, one of the most extraordinary wildernesses in South America. The famous towers and horns of Torres del Paine are not merely beautiful mountains. They are visible records of immense geological time, sculpted by uplift, fracture, and ice over millions of years. Human beings tend to measure importance through history, nations, economies, and events. But here those measures feel strangely small. In the face of granite, glaciers, and lakes so blue they almost seem unreal, Patagonia begins speaking in a language older than politics. Crossing into Argentina, that language becomes even more overwhelming near El Calafate and Perito Moreno Glacier. Once little more than a settlement serving sheep farms, El Calafate later became the gateway to Los Glaciares National Park. Nearby, Laguna Nimes shelters dozens of bird species, including flamingos. But the great presence here is the glacier itself. Perito Moreno rises like a frozen wall of force. Its blue is so intense it almost seems invented. Its crevasses, caves, and ancient layers, darkened by trapped sediment, do not feel decorative. They feel sovereign. Glaciers like this answer the title of the story more clearly than any argument could. The limits of human power are easiest to understand, not in theory, but in the presence of things that make human scale seem irrelevant. Farther north, El Chaltén stands beneath Mount Fitz Roy, a peak the Tehuelche once called the Smoking Mountain because clouds so often gather around its summit. Nearby, General Carrera Lake reveals another side of Patagonia's power. The marble caves, shaped by waves over thousands of years, into smooth blue and white corridors, domes, and columns. Nothing here feels designed. Everything feels patiently carved by time. Along the Carretera Austral, Cuelat National Park adds one more expression of that same truth. Its hanging glacier appears suspended between cliffs, with meltwater falling into the forest below. This landscape, was not arranged for human admiration. It was formed through processes that neither asked for nor required human presence. And after all the glaciers, mountains, channels, and frontiers, the final weight of Patagonia is not only what it shows the eye, but what it does to the human idea of civilization. As the journey continues north and east, Patagonia keeps changing its appearance. Puerto Madryn opens onto Atlantic waters, where southern right whales arrive to mate and give birth. Puerto Varas reflects German settlement traditions beside Lake Yanquihue and the cone of Osorno volcano. Bariloche rises beside Nahuel Huapi with its alpine atmosphere. The route of the 7 lakes follows old paths once used by Mapuche communities moving between valleys. Farther on, Lanín stands like a sacred white pyramid above the land, while Villarrica remains one of the region's active volcanic presences. In Neuquén, Salto del Agrio cuts through rock stained red, orange, and yellow by sulfur, iron, and copper. All these places are different, yet they leave behind the same impression. Patagonia never fully yields. Even where towns settle in, where roads connect distances, and where tourism creates the appearance of familiarity, the region still feels governed by something larger than daily human intention. The modern world likes to believe that the earth has been measured, organized, and drawn into systems of use. Over time, people begin to assume that power means control, and control means permanence. Patagonia quietly weakens that assumption. In a place like this, cities feel provisional. Roots feel vulnerable. Even history begins to look smaller beside oceans, volcanoes, glaciers, and wind. Patagonia offers something rare. It is not emptiness. It is not absence. It is a last kind of silence, a presence so vast that illusion starts to fall away. And maybe that is the real meaning of the edge of the world. Not the final point on a map, but the place where human confidence begins to thin out, where civilization grows quieter, and where people are forced to remember that the earth is still older, deeper, and less obedient than civilization prefers to admit. Patagonia reveals that truth slowly, through distance, weather, silence, and the enduring authority of land, water, ice, and stone. In the end, Patagonia leaves behind more than images. It leaves behind perspective. It reminds the listener that not everything meaningful can be controlled, and not everything powerful needs to be conquered. Sometimes the deepest lesson a place can offer is humility. At the center edge of South America, where the map begins to break apart, human ambition still exists, but it no longer looks supreme. The world remains larger than the systems built to contain it, and in Patagonia, that truth is still visible.